Is it the industry's position and your association's position that the money is better spent subsidizing their gun sales or feeding hungry kids before school?
I'm not going to answer that question the way it was phrased. I'm sorry. I don't think that was appropriate, really. I mean, I don't think anybody in the industry would say that. I certainly wouldn't say that.
There is nothing in the Second Amendment about the right to purchase arms. So the notion that you have a right to purchase firearms is not in the Constitution. I know you're not a constitutional scholar, but you're up here talking about the Constitution as the rationale for why we should take money away from what could be used to fund breakfast to subsidizing gun sales. And money is fungible. That's how it works. So it's a fair comparison.
We must do our part to preserve the integrity and opportunity for women to compete on a level playing field, to be able to compete without the threat of a competitor who has an unfair advantage.
This is a vote to protect women and children. We must protect our children from making life-altering decisions at such an early age, decisions that they will never be able to reverse. When it comes to women's athletics, this vote ensures that females can compete on a level playing field and not against biological males.
Folks, please watch closely at what is happening here today. Find out who truly cares about your privacy. The so-called party of personal and parental rights and privacy is voting to take away your parental rights. The party of so-called freedom is voting to take away your freedom today against their own Republican governor. Keeping government out of your personal health care decisions? I think not. The hypocrisy in this room is rich. And keeping Ohio a welcoming state that is open for business? Boy, I sure do hope the decision makers over at Intel are watching this today.
Young men and women should be affirmed based upon their biology. Our job as parents, grandparents, and educators should help them navigate the difficult waters of adolescence and come out on the other side as healthy adults. That's what real compassion looks like. The modern issue of gender is not a social construct, but the idea you can change your gender is.
This is not a gender-affirming bill, so I don't know why half the testimony was about gender-affirming, concepts related to that. This is a bathroom ban bill, right? One serious question I have for you is, can you tell the difference between a trans woman and a biological woman?
Some people can, some people can't. The point is, it's not safe for our kids. And in this scenario, when we're saying we're going to let public schools, especially K through 12, open up their restrooms, they can't discriminate based on age. So if they're allowing boys and girls to share restrooms, locker rooms, and showers, they're going to have to let adults in too.
But you're missing something important here. You just, in the beginning, you said some people can, some people can't. So you're telling me you're going to tell a young woman, a young trans woman, you can't tell the difference whether she's a trans woman or a biological woman. She looks like a woman. You're telling her that she has to go use the men's bathroom. You're opening her up to a multitude of situations of harassment, molestation possibly. You're opening them up to danger. How are you not seeing that point? So I want to ask you, where is the disconnect there?
Chair, Representative, it's incumbent upon the school leaders, whether they be K-12 school leaders or higher ed school leaders, to know what a birth certificate says. And so this bill is about protection. And so we want to protect our young students. We want to protect our students in college. And that's what this bill is about. And so it's important that school leaders know who is a boy and who is a girl based on their birth certificate.
I didn't ask about birth certificate, but thank you.
Across our country, female athletes are currently losing scholarships, championships, opportunities, medals, education, and training opportunities to these discriminatory policies that allow males to compete in female-only sports. The Safe Women's Sports Act will require schools to designate separate teams for participants of the biological female sex. No school interscholastic conference or organization that regulates interscholastic athletics shall permit biological males to participate on an athletic team or an athletic competition designated only for female participants.
Listening to my colleagues here speak, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, and I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that what we're doing is harmful to people in our state.
In Luke 17, Jesus says that if you cause one of these little ones of mine to stumble, it would be better for you to have a millstone hung around your neck and be thrown into the deepest sea. So there are also concerns that Jesus has for children, and in Genesis he tells us that he created them male and female.
This makes a great point, because we're now with Genesis, the Old Testament, and we just cited 2 from the New Testament. And last time I checked, we are in a democratic republic where we have separation of church and state. Do you see how we're not separating church and state continuously, especially in this GA?
Ohio voters were fooled into thinking marijuana is less harmful than alcohol. It's not. One swallow of alcohol can induce psychotic behaviors, but one swallow of a marijuana edible can. One hit off a potent THC vape can, and 2 hits from a marijuana bong can. Ohio voters were deceived by well-funded lobbyists and campaigns that disguise the effects of this powerful drug. Even though the facts prove marijuana legalization in other states has failed, is a threat to public health and safety, and a racist policy that targets disadvantaged communities, the opponents of marijuana legalization were way underfunded, and this information was not readily available to Ohio voters. It's not a fair fight, but thankfully, members of this committee are the gatekeepers that can lessen the impacts of this marijuana bomb before it's detonated on Ohio families.
Once again, I will open up this up. I will show this book. Roar, Stacy Sine's book, written in 2016, to talk about how women will be able to be better athletes if they train as women. And in the book, she continually says, we cannot compete with men. She didn't do this to talk about the transgender issue. She talked about this to help women be better athletes. This isn't about me as an aging athlete. This is about every girl and every woman in Ohio.
One of the reasons cited for this legislation is that there's not enough known about the long-term implications of these treatments. The premise is that the doctors, parents, and youth themselves could be wrong. It's also very real that the doctors, parents, and youth are right, and that those supporting these bills could be wrong. Voting for this legislation says that our elected representatives are the ones who are best positioned to take risks with these children's lives rather than their own parents and healthcare providers. This legislation takes away parents' rights to make healthcare decisions for their children and takes away healthcare providers' rights to provide evidence-based care to their patients. The families I know are tired of having their private lives legislated when the only ones who will be impacted by these decisions are the vulnerable children themselves and those who love them. It is my hope that this General Assembly will stop restricting rights of the vulnerable and will instead focus on issues that actually help Ohioans.
Dog whistle politics, the proverbial boogeyman that doesn't exist, is killing our democracy. And with this vote to override the governor's veto today, you are literally killing our children. Take that in for a moment. Literally killing our children. All to win your Republican primary races. Disgusting.
I'd like to ask the representative to keep the comments to the bill,
And lastly,
please.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for allowing me the time to say something today. I hope all of the money that CCV, the so-called Center for Christian Virtue, raises off of bullying our children keeps them up every single night of their low lives.
This is a chance for me to testify on legislation to protect all students and restore sanity. Would we ever have imagined this would be necessary? History is very relevant to this issue. In many places around the world, children were not valued like they have been in Western society. This is still true today. Children are being sold for sex, put to work in mines and factories, even killed because they are girls and not considered as valuable due to cultural beliefs or harsh totalitarian rulers like the Chinese communists. with their one-child policy. It's been different in countries with a Judeo-Christian foundation, where political leaders have often been rooted in faith. In our country, since the Puritans and Pilgrims first arrived and until recently, we believed God created man in his own image. Progressive education teaches children's feelings should be constantly affirmed, including feelings of identity, regardless of whether they are rooted in reality or even healthy. That's the compassionate thing to do. Affirming confusion is not compassion. In fact, encouraging confusion puts all students at risk. Children's brains are being forced to consider issues that are too complex for many adults. The job of educators is to teach students to reason, not indulge their often irrational and unrealistic feelings. And what about truth? What about reality? Boys cannot become girls, and girls cannot become boys. You cannot change DNA.
So policing, I guess, the bathroom and people's bodily parts are probably possible. I mean, if that's your intent, then it's probably possible. And you probably know the students well enough to know what their birth origin is, because I guess you want a birth certificate carried around, like your license when you drive. I guess you need a license to go to the bathroom.
With that, we're going to call forth House Bill 189 to exempt from taxation the sale of certain firearms and ammunition. We're bringing it forth for its second hearing. This is proponent hearing. And the chair would like to recognize Christopher Lee with the Firearms Industry Trade Association for proponent testimony. And please proceed when you're ready.
The firearm industry currently creates about 15,000 jobs in Ohio and has an annual economic impact of about $2.5 billion in the state. I join you in support of this bill for two primary reasons. First, law-abiding Americans should never have to pay a tax to exercise a fundamental constitutional right. The legislature has an opportunity to show that it considers the Second Amendment to be a first-class right alongside the First Amendment. As I'm sure a lot of you have heard, newspapers are tax exempt. This is a chance to do the same for the Second Amendment. And I know a state or two have done this sort of thing with tax credits for companies looking to move there in the firearm industry. But this would really set Ohio apart from a lot of these other states that are currently in competition for firearm industry companies.
Representative Isaacson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for coming in for your testimony today from Indiana. It's nice to have you here in Ohio. I'll start with a question that I asked the sponsor last week, although slightly different. Do you think this bill will make it, if passed, more likely that we have more guns in the state of Ohio than we currently do?
I can't answer that to the chair, to the representative. I'm not sure. I don't know if we've seen studies from other states that have done this sort of thing, so I can't answer that. But I will say that more guns means more people able to protect themselves in their homes. So I think that'd be a great thing if that were the outcome.
Follow-up? Follow-up, yeah. The premise of, and I'm going to leave the second part of the bill about trying to attract gun manufacturers to our state. I just want to focus on the first part of the bill around, that nothing that is a constitutional right should have a tax associated with it. Is that, I think I heard that right, and I just want to be clear that the rationale, clearly, because I'm trying to understand the rationale for the first part, that we should make gun sales tax-free. It's clearly not to increase the number of guns, which is what most sales taxes are about, and tax credit. So it's not that, because you can't say whether it's going to do that. You have no idea whether it's going to do that. So then the other rationale is that we want some consistency with other approaches to constitutional rights. For newspapers, for example, are somehow the analogy that you're using with guns. But is it the case that you believe that we should have no sales tax on guns because that is consistent with how we approach every other constitutional right?
Chair, I'm not going to address every other constitutional right, but I will say that I think you would be hard-pressed to find an item that is directly necessary for someone to purchase for them to be able to exercise their right. Like the First Amendment, right, at one point the newspapers, back when the newspapers were tax exempt, the newspapers were extremely important to communication. We didn't have Facebook or Twitter or any of those things. So, a bunch of states, I don't know how many states exempted newspapers from the sales tax, but I think that they were deemed as being necessary to people's exercise of their First Amendment rights. Today, I don't know if that's the case, and that's not for me to decide, and that's not for me to decide with any other constitutional right. But like I said, I don't know of any other constitutional right where literally the purchase of an item is directly necessary for somebody to exercise that right. So if, like I said, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I don't know of another right where there's that direct correlation.
Representative Isaacson.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to wait till everyone else got a question in.
That's how we do it here.
And I also want to clarify to your clarifying question, I am focused on specifically the sales tax related to the sale and purchase of firearms, not manufacturing. With that in mind, we haven't spoken yet about the fiscal effect here, but it is estimated by LBO that it would be between $23 and $39 million in permanent lost state revenue to the GRF, plus an additional 5.9 to 9.8 in terms of reduced local tax collections. So my question to you is, if I'll take the conservative end, $26 million a year permanently lost to the GRF, that's exactly the amount, it just so happens, that it would cost to make sure that every young person in Ohio had free access to breakfast before school.
I'm just saying that people shouldn't have to pay to exercise their constitutional right, and we shouldn't be putting a price on the exercise of a right of the people of Ohio. But I'm not going to answer the way it was phrased. I'm sorry.
Follow-up?
Quick follow-up. I think you did answer it, which is what I would expect, which is you wouldn't say that, and the industry wouldn't say it. And I just want to put a finer note on what the much more accomplished attorney to my right clarified about the Second Amendment. This is not about, there is nothing in the Second Amendment about the right to purchase arms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in direct opposition to everything Representative Powell just said in terms of the override of the governor's veto on House Bill 68. When I decided to run for office, it was because my entire career has been focused on caring for women, educating people, whether it was a patient, a medical student, or a resident. In running for office, I had the naive belief that I would be surrounded by other legislators who wanted to improve life in Ohio through thoughtful legislation that would make education more accessible, healthcare less expensive, and more attainable. But here we are, brought back in an emergency meeting to discuss women's sports that affects one person in Ohio, and to impact the hundreds of people that have come in to testify against this bill. Whatever the issue was, I believed we were all here to listen and learn and create legislation that would move Ohio forward. And what we're doing is moving people backwards. We are restricting people's rights. We are taking away health care. I knew that these health issues would be legislated, and I felt that it was really important to represent experts and share that knowledge with those outside the medical profession. Legislators don't trust science, and the hundreds of experts, the hundreds of people that have come in and testified repeatedly. I came in and testified against the SAFE Act in 2019, in 2020, and in 2021, before I ever ran for office. When I was preparing my comments today, I ran across that testimony. At that time, the bill died in the last assembly. However, this time, when those same experts came in to testify, along with their parents, along with the kids who shared their personal private stories, they were dismissed, and a political, hateful agenda was pushed through. Why? Because of money given by radical Christian groups to push an agenda that does not help a single family. Why? Because your Google search makes your knowledge equal to my 30-plus years in medicine. Is it because...
Representative, if we could ask folks in the gallery to please remain quiet so the representatives may express their words. Thank you.
Is it because politics is no longer about listening to your constituents, as gerrymandering creates districts for the politician? Is it because we have all forgotten how to listen and learn from others and how to compromise and negotiate? Overriding a veto that was made after much deliberation and thought by a governor shows the community how little we respect our colleagues and how we are only pushing a political agenda that appeals to a fringe of voters. Last year, the voters loudly and clearly showed us with overwhelming percentages that they don't trust the State House in August, and they don't want us to have the absolute say in how Ohio is governed. They want a say in this, and we are not pushing legislation that helps that. HB 68 is harmful to the next generation, and it does nothing to protect our youth. Statistics show that Ohio is growing older, and only in Columbus is our younger population increasing. I would say that this is a direct result of the number of bills that have been proposed that hurt evidence-based health care, public education, including diversity, equality, and inclusion, and do nothing to improve the financial well-being of our citizens.
I appreciate all of you allowing me to speak today and recognize the service you give Ohioans. My name is Aubrey Adams. I am director of a nonprofit called Every Brain Matters. Colorado's marijuana destroyed my family, and Ohio's marijuana will destroy Ohio families too. My son became addicted to marijuana, and my husband became addicted to marijuana and had episodes of cannabis psychosis. Psychosis is when a person has a break from reality, and the symptoms are paranoia, hallucinations, or delusions. This cost us everything. We had to sell two of our homes to pay, our only two homes to pay for our treatment. We have no equity left. My whole family has been traumatized, which will cost us for the rest of our lives. Here are my urgent recommendations to protect Ohio families. I support that the bill doesn't allow home grows because it turns every home into a potential drug house and supports the black market. I ask you to ban all marijuana edibles that look like normal foods. Children are being poisoned across America at astronomical rates. We need to track sales of marijuana from store to store. I testified on HB 1317 in Colorado. That's what fuels the black market. People go store to store to store by the end of the day and buy as much product as they can, and then they traffic it to college campuses and high schools. I ask you to take all flavoring out of marijuana vapes. Sugary flavors mask the foul taste of these products. If they did not contain flavors, people would spit them out because they taste like chemicals drenched with weed.
The bill's title is supposed to be the Protect All Students Act, and thanks to the acceptance of the sub-bill by all of you, we now have a name for our bill. The next thing that we're covering is a very small change permitting an individual to use their official birth record to prove biological sex as long as the birth record was issued at or near the time of the individual's birth. The previous version just specified that the sex listed on the birth record could be relied upon if it was issued at or near the time. So now we're giving them permission to use it. The next issue is multi-occupancy facility prohibitions. We're just defining multi-occupancy facility as a restroom, locker room, changing room, or shower room that is accessible to multiple individuals at the same time. But this does not include a family facility that's designed for an individual or for a family or somebody who needs assistance. And also, we're prohibiting a school or an institution of higher ed from constructing, establishing, or maintaining a multi-occupancy facility that is designated as non-gendered, multi-gendered, or open to all genders. And again, exempting family facilities from the prohibition.
It specifies that the institution cannot knowingly permit. We added the word knowingly. It requires clear signage. It also makes clear exceptions for assisting a child in the restroom, assisting a disabled person in the restroom, assisting in an emergency, and also for janitorial services. It also prohibits the construction or the maintaining of multi-occupancy, multi-gendered restrooms. So I think that's really the 4 or 5 main points.
Do we have any questions? Representative Weinstein.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm just trying to understand, while we're taking this moment to update or to make changes to this bill, why are we hearing this bill? I have had no complaints, and I double-checked that with my staff. I'm not aware of any complaints in higher ed or in education in general about this. So, is this a solution looking for a problem, or do you have some large group of people who are being negatively impacted by this? Like, why are you doing this?
Yes, Vice Chair Manning, Representative Weinstein, I totally hear what you're saying, and I have no doubt to the truthfulness of what you just attested. But we all have different constituencies, and I'm fairly sure that your constituency might not be bringing these things to you, but the same thing is not true of me. And I doubt the same thing is true for others. And so just like I think you're telling the truth, I'm telling the truth when I tell you that this is something that I'm hearing from constituents and superintendents from around the state of Ohio. And so, I think they're both true. But I understand your concern. Why should we do this if you're not hearing from your people? And the reason to do it is because I am hearing from mine, and I think we're hearing from others around the state.
Representative Brown.
Thank you. Representatives, thank you for your sub-bill. In 2021, the United States Supreme Court, including all justices appointed by former President Trump, let stand a ruling from the Fourth Circuit denying access to bathrooms in accordance with one's gender identity can violate both Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The question in litigation around legislation like this across the country is not whether or not bathrooms and facilities can be segregated by sex. The question is who may use these segregated bathrooms. And the vast majority of courts have ruled that excluding transgender students from using facilities consistent with their gender identities is in fact unlawful discrimination. Would any of the changes in the sub-bill affect those rulings?
Go ahead. Okay. Let's both go.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Manning, Representative Brown. As you noted, there are conflicting rulings from the various courts. This issue is about protecting young men, young women, boys and girls, all young men, young women, boys and girls. It's more important that we act on their behalf than that we take into consideration something that is a complete violation of the intent of Title IX. It was never created for this purpose, and there are courts that agree with us on that issue. So pushing forward with this after we have made some changes at the request of higher education is something that's very important to both my joint sponsor and myself.
Vice Chair, if I could also chime in, Representative Brown, you said the Fourth Circuit? Yeah, so Fourth Circuit, obviously that doesn't pertain to Ohio, and so also there has been no U.S. Supreme Court decision on this point. And so I think we feel like it's important to carry this forward despite that one ruling in the Fourth Circuit.
Follow up?
Continue.
Thank you. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is this district, has interpreted both federal anti-discrimination laws and Ohio statutes to prohibit discrimination based on gender identity, considering that a subset of sex discrimination. And the ruling of the Fourth Circuit, the Supreme Court denied cert, which means it's essentially the Fourth Circuit's ruling stands. The Supreme Court didn't overturn it. So my question still remains, there are courts, and maybe there are courts that rule one way, there are courts that rule the other way. Arguably, the Supreme Court has indirectly supported this Fourth Circuit's position. And the question I asked was, do any of the changes you've made, would any of those changes specifically have any direct impact upon the applicability of any of the legislation that you're aware of, the case law that you're aware of regarding this issue?
Vice Chair Manning and Rep. Brown, we made changes to this bill based on meetings that we had with interested parties. We did not make any changes to this bill based on Fourth Circuit court rulings. And so I believe that this is an issue that is important to a growing number of Americans and a growing number of Ohioans. And I think that in light of that, in what I view as a growing momentum in our country and in our state for a bill language like this, that there's going to be additional litigation and perhaps court cases that make it to the U.S. Supreme Court on issues such as this. And I think that we as a legislative body need to weigh in, and we need to quit sitting on the sideline while the executive branch in Washington, D.C. makes decisions and while the judicial branch makes decisions. We need to weigh in as a legislative branch in the state of Ohio.
Ranking Member Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair to the sponsors. So you had stated we have issues with this as a problem down in your area, but maybe not where we're at. We're making law that, of course, many of us see as unconstitutional, and we're making law to suit a certain group of people that have issue with bathrooms and their use by certain groups of people. Besides the fact that we're making those decisions based on a certain group of people, but we're going to write law for the entire state, which really goes against the idea of home rule. Maybe I can move away from the Constitution and move into something that over the holiday season I got to hear again. And maybe I can ask you, how does this jive? How does this match up with maybe something that's more familiar? There's a song that was based off of Matthew 25. And it basically said, "Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me." How do you jive this bill with the teachings that you proclaim?
Vice Chair Manning, Representative Miller, thank you for your question, and thank you for bringing up the Christmas season and what the Bible has to say. Because in Luke 17, Jesus says that if you caused one of these little ones of mine to stumble, it would be better for you to have a millstone hung around your neck and be thrown into the deepest sea. So there are also concerns that Jesus has for children, and in Genesis, he tells us that he created them male and female.
How do you feel about this bill's religious backing and forcing the religious backing onto those in our society who may not subscribe to the Old or New Testament?
Vice Chair Manning and Representative Miller, I would point out that we didn't bring up the Bible, you did. And I don't think that we've talked about what the Bible says during our testimony. And we've talked about protecting kids, and I think in the end that that's really what this is about. And I don't think that there's anything in this bill that's in conflict with what the Bible teaches. But again, I would point out that we didn't bring that up.
Well, if we're not using science, then I figured maybe we were using religion. Thank you, Chair.
Representative Abu Dhabi.
Abdullahi, thank you, Chair. I guess we'll go back to the question that we had in the beginning. How do you plan on enforcing this? Do you plan on having students carry their birth certificates before they go to the bathroom? Like, what's this supposed to look like?
Vice Chair Manning, Representative Abdullahi, what it says in the bill is that education institutions can create policies, and they need to create policies that are consistent with the language in the bill. So we are giving them the ability to decide how they want to take what we hope will become law and use it, and we're giving them some tools by suggesting that they can use the birth certificate if it was issued at or near the time of birth. So That's one of the main reasons, or one of the main ways that we are trying to make sure that both K through 12 and higher ed have opportunities to create policies that fit their student body.
Continue.
Thank you. I know I'm new, but last I checked, laws are not suggestions, they're laws. So what would be the penalty? As I know there's nothing written here, but so what's the purpose of this if it's not an actual law?
Vice Chair Manning, Representative Abdullahi.
Abdullahi.
The penalty would be up to the policy writer and in that school and Institute of Higher Ed. And so what this bill says is, especially for institutes of higher ed, they shall not knowingly permit. And so that to me says that you're not going to post a guard at the restroom, but once you know about it because someone has complained about it, then you as an administrator of that school, you are tasked with doing something about it. And so, you know, in my life in education, I believe in the principle of progressive discipline. And I think that most educators do. And so, you don't give them the most severe punishment at first. You give them something a little bit light and say, hey, don't do that again. And if they continue to violate that, then you go a little bit more stringent. And so what I would say is this bill doesn't prescribe to the educational institute what the punishment's going to be. That's on them to write that.
That sounds dangerous. Thank you.
I heard some things in the testimony that piqued my curiosity, having taught history and sociology and government at levels. I've come to realize that we look for patterns. We look for patterns of human behavior and how policy, and historically, certain behaviors have resulted in policies, whether they come out of the state or out of the federal level. And this is eerily reminiscent of discussions in the 50s about how white women feared black males in the same restaurant, in the same room, in the same area. They feared that. And that this is what I'm hearing, these same arguments. It's eerily similar to the racist policies that were had in the South regarding special bathrooms, special water fountains, can't use the same restaurants, can't look a white woman in the eyes. This is just a different group of Americans, of Ohioans, of citizens, which we are so wrapped up in. My question to you is this: do you see a parallel there? And if you don't, please help me to understand how it's not there.